message today is America in Prophecy. And it's a normal question. It's not at all a surprising question for people to ask in our time. And it's certainly one of the most common questions that American Christians ask from prophecy is, where is America in prophecy? Why don't we see something there that looks like it's a reference to America? And everyone is quite reasonably certain that it must be there. How could it not be? America is a most powerful nation. It is greater than all the others in almost every way. How can it not be part of Revelation? How can it not be a factor in Revelation? And and that assumption behind that is that the time must be soon. It can't be that long from now until we get to that point where the end times are upon us. So how could America just not be there? It's an unthinkable thing. And so naturally, with that kind of an attitude, people find ways to find America in prophecy. And I've seen books and other things dealing with that topic. And one of the places that they go to is Revelation 12:14. And I'll read that. It says, "And two wings of a great eagle were given to the woman, who is Israel, to fly into the wilderness to her place, to be sustained there for a time, times, and half a time, from before the face of the serpent." Okay, this is obviously symbolic in many ways, but people have decided to interpret the eagle wings according to their own understanding, what makes sense to people. And so it makes sense to people to think that, well, the symbol for America is the eagle, and therefore the eagle in prophecy must represent America. Now, that's a really bad way to approach prophecy. That's basing your own thinking and world situation on how you interpret prophecy, and that just leads you into error. And so implicit in this logic is the assumption that God thinks like we do. And so if we think that eagles are the symbol for the United States, then that would be the symbol that would be used in Revelation as well. And I've seen people go further with that. They've said that the bear is a reference to Russia and things like that. But those are symbolisms that we use in our society, but God thinks of things in much different ways than that. And so that's just not a bad way, not a good way to think at all. And applying that logic to this verse that we just read is believing that America is, or results in believing that America is rescuing Israel by flying them away in planes. And so perhaps even the planes of American Airlines, because they have a winged eagle for a logo. You see how that goes further when you apply that winged eagle idea to things that we have now that are represented by winged eagles. And that's just never been the way God has done things. So this isn't a valid approach to interpreting prophecy at all, and it leads you to this idea that can't be supported at all. And so this false idea continues on despite the weaknesses in it for a couple of reasons. It's partly due to a desire to find America in prophecy. And so if you're determined to find America in prophecy, you'll find some verses that you can believe, you can twist and make them show that this is actually talking about America. But it's also due to our poor knowledge of the Old Testament and the Bible in general. The Bible interprets itself. That's a phrase you've probably heard if you've been looking at prophecy for any length of time. The Bible is the explanation for its own prophecies, is the idea there. So Revelation commonly uses references that you can find in the Old Testament. And same thing for Daniel. In fact, Revelation refers to Daniel many times. And so because we don't often understand Revelation, the thing we should do is look at the rest of the Bible to see if the same ideas are represented, the same symbols are represented, those kind of things. And so the mistake that people have done here is that they haven't looked at the Old Testament or the New Testament, although there aren't any, to look for references to wings in that context as a description of something. And there's a perfect example in Exodus 19:4, where it says, you yourselves, this is God speaking, you yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt, and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. So from that you can see quite clearly how the wings are meant to be understood. The wings are an indication of God protecting people as he carries them to safety, just as he did back when they left Egypt. So when we see eagle's wings being used here to represent God protecting people as he carries them to safety, we can apply the same idea to Revelation and say this is another example of God protecting his people as he carries them to safety. And so from that, I have a question for you to think about, and I'm not going to give an answer for it here. But here's a question for those who have some wisdom. If the eagle's wings for Israel were walls of water that fell on the Egyptians, what are the wings in Revelation? And so you can think about that by yourself. But the important thing to grasp here is that eagle wings in Revelation, as they are in Exodus, are a representation of God protecting his people and carrying them to safety from a bad situation. So where is America in Revelation? It isn't. It just isn't. People have tried to find it in there, but it's simply not in there. Any true interpretation wouldn't see that. And so, but that's an important thing to get to. Once we can accept that that is the answer, we can ask a better question that leads us to a better, more understanding. And the question that we should be asking is, why isn't it in Revelation? And there's good reasons for this. If you look at the whole of prophecy, really, and not just Revelation, you will see that great powers come and go. We can look at the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Romans. Those are all mentioned in the Bible. And if we look at history generally, we see all sorts of other countries that have come and gone. And so great powers come and go, and that's just the way things are. And the case that we see so many times is their greatness brings them wealth and power, but that wealth and power corrupts them and destroys them, and then they fall off and die out. And that's such a standard pattern for all of these world governments that have come and gone, is that they had a period when they were great and powerful and wealthy, but they became completely corrupt because of that. And they had horrible leaders who led them, and they fell apart, infighting sometimes. Sometimes they were just so useless that they were easily overpowered by their enemies. And that's just the pattern. Great powers come and they go. And so that shouldn't be a surprise to us. And the other thing that we can pull from prophecy is that we know that there is a different world coming. We call it the world of the 10-headed beast. Daniel refers to that as Revelation does. And this is a unified world government. It's not a one world government, not a single world government. It's a unified world government. And that's a little different here in that these governments are, these 10 governments that are within this unified government have some autonomy. It isn't just a single world government. And we'll see that a little bit when we look at some stuff. And there's so much autonomy, in fact, that it's possible to have a war, even a nuclear war, between different heads of that beast. So there is that much autonomy between them. But it's important to understand that what this 10-headed beast is telling us. It's saying that the world is reorganized into 10 geographic, well, it doesn't say geographic, but that would be the only logical way to do it, but into 10 regions. And so there are 10 sub-governments within this single world unified government. And that's a big change from where we are now. That's a similar form of government to what we see in the EU right now. All of those countries kind of came together and said, we think it'd be a great idea to have a central government that we would give up some of our power and control to those, and they would take care of a lot of the matters and unify us together into a more powerful one set of countries, everybody working in the same direction and not fighting each other. And so it seemed like a good idea. But looking back at the history of the EU and everything that's happened there, no one would ever say that the EU has been some kind of a raving success that you would want everybody to follow around the world. It hasn't been that at all. I won't go into what it has been. But so why would anybody want to take all of the nations in the world and somehow put them together into 10 sub-governments? It's an unimaginable idea. We just can't imagine how would you get there from where we are now. And so why would anybody think this is a good idea? And maybe more of the question is, which one of the countries, US, China, Russia, India, or any of the others, is going to give up its sovereignty willingly? Well, the US certainly isn't. China and Russia certainly aren't. And none of these countries have any motivation to do that right now. In the case of Europe, there was some motivation in that the smaller European countries didn't have the kind of power that the US or China or Russia had, and so they wanted to merge together so they could get a greater power between them. So they had a motivation, but none of those countries now, the US, China, Russia, India, are the big ones, but lots of others as well. they just don't have any motivation to join a government like that. They wouldn't get anything that they want out of that. And in addition to that, what has to happen is the UN would need to be dissolved or completely restructured. And there would be a lot of people against that whole idea too. The UN is in a way a central government like that, except it's quite different. It has 15 heads. If you're describing it in the way that prophecy describes these large organizations, large governments, and it has 15 heads, 5 of which are permanent members and 10 of which are not permanent members of that. And so, if they were depicted in Revelation, they would be depicted much differently than this. So we can see that the UN is not part of Revelation either. And it's just necessary to kind of think that that's an obvious thing. And so the question is still left to us. How do you get there from here? How do we start with all these countries that are happy where they are and they have no reason to join an organization and give up their sovereignty or authority in any way? And remember, the UN doesn't do that. It doesn't take any real control. It has no real power. It's all by voting and agreeing and people acting, countries acting in their own best interests. So the only imaginable answer that could get us to that situation where we would want to reorganize everything and where the countries we now have would want to give up their sovereignty is through a global collapse. Everything must fall apart so badly that people would say, we got to start over and we're going to do it a different way. And so this global collapse, you can tell for sure some things that would be characteristics of it. It's going to be a financial collapse. That's certainly true. We see so many other financial references and financial restructurings in this new world government in Revelation itself. And we can also see that that's the way the world wants to go right now. There are so many people in power who want a unified monetary system, a single world currency. Those kind of ideas are very popular right now. And any kind of collapse like that is almost certain, very highly likely, that there's going to be wars as a result of that, fighting between these countries. If there was a financial collapse and some country can no longer pay what it owed to the other country, there's going to be some unhappiness about that. So all of this is going to be a really bad situation that's going to happen. And that's the only way you can get to this restructuring of the whole world that needs to happen. There are lots of people who would like it to happen in a slow, methodical, step-by-step way, but you just can't get past the fact that the big countries are not going to give up their sovereignty in any significant way. So, continuing on with the question of how are we going to get to this world? When we look at this from history perspective, we see that there was a world restructuring that happened at the end of World War II, and that one was brought on the world order that we have right now. And from a financial perspective, there was what's now called the Bretton Woods Agreement, and that set the US dollar as becoming the world currency, and all trade is done in US dollars now. And that is very unpopular now with a lot of other countries, China, Russia, and not just them. They think that there should be other world currencies and that, so they're already itching to change that system. And what brought on also as a result of that restructuring at the end of World War II was a change in governance. The UN became a world body that although it had very, very little power, it still had some power through nagging and persuading, and not through legislative power. But those two things were brought into place at the end of World War II because of that world war that brought so much destruction and death and poverty and all the rest of that goes along with it. And so for the same reason, it would have to be that level of a event that would cause a restructuring of the current world into this new world that we see mentioned in the Bible. So the next world restructuring, there are some things we can kind of expect because we can see them already happening and planning in our time, or because the Bible talks about them. And the financial, as I mentioned before, there are lots of people aching for a one world currency, so that transactions between all of the international bodies can be done easily. And this has already been planned. There's people who have all sorts of ideas about how this can be done. And one important part of that needs to be done, and we've seen it in different forums, is the end to this modern monetary theory, which is the idea that you can just keep on spending madly and going into debt. And a lot of countries are doing that right now, and that may be, in fact, the cause of the collapse that is going to lead to all of this. So a one world currency means that there's going to be one power who's going to be in charge of this, and there can't be a whole bunch of other countries implementing different monetary policies that are conflicting with each other. And it would put an end to a lot of that financial control for sure. So this new world organization would definitely be a financial organization, and it would keep countries from destroying themselves. And we've already seen that in other places. A lot of the European countries got into real financial trouble and still are because of the policies that they had financially. And so because they were allowed to act without any oversight on anything, they made really bad decisions. And now they want people to cover for them and help them out of their troubles. So financial would be a big part of the restructuring. We can already see the pieces ready to go into position on that one. And governments or governance, countries would be grouped together for regional representation. And remember, this 10-headed world means that there would be 10 organizations that would make up the whole world government. And so these 10 governing bodies would fix some of the problems that we know that we already have. Currently, there are too many countries in too many sizes, and that just makes the whole thing hard to manage. So you've got big countries, you've got small countries, you've got countries with huge populations in small areas, you've got small populations in large areas, and it makes hard a situation to manage when you have such differences between what you're trying to do and manage. And we have a similar problem. We see it already in the United States. There are states that are large and some that are small, some that are large with small populations, some that are large with large populations, and vice versa, all of the different variations that we see. And that causes problems in how you manage the thing. It sometimes seems unfair to treat all of the states the same in the Senate when they're so obviously so different. And so we know that that would be another thing that would have to happen here, is that there would be an effort to merge the countries together into more logical and more uniform organizations, and that would be part of what this 10-headed world would do. But we also know more power would have to be given to this governing body. Not much more, because it's hard to imagine too much power being given to it, but still a significant more power than the UN has, and the UN really has no power now. So that would be another change that we would expect. So the change that we would expect is unifying countries together for their own benefit, a similar problem that we see in the States being fixed that way, and more power going into governance, into a central governing body that we just don't have now. So summarizing all of this, America in prophecy. So the reason America isn't mentioned in prophecy is that it will collapse like most other countries, and that collapse is almost certain. You just can't get to that 10-headed, 10 representation country situation unless you do that. So it's going to collapse like most other countries will at that time. People are going to starve and die for a period of time. They're going to fight and kill for a period of time. Society will collapse. And so at some point, people will say, this just isn't working anymore. The whole thing has collapsed and fallen apart. We need to do a new thing, and the new thing will come about. So, and the U.S., as a result of this collapse, will become nothing special as a country. Right now, it's obviously number one, and it won't be number one anymore. There will just be a whole bunch of countries that are struggling to survive and live and keep their people fed. So it will be merged into one of 10 regional organizations, likely a North America region. There are already people who have mapped out ideas for how you would reorganize the world into 10 groups. And so, and a logical grouping would be for North America to put Canada and the US, maybe Mexico together into one, and then the Latin American countries would be into another, and break up by Europe and other ways across the rest of the world. And so these regional organizations would become the 10 heads of prophecy that we're talking about. And so that's why America isn't mentioned. It just isn't America anymore, not the America that we know right now.